much for your response. Welcome once again to our third day, right? Third day, day three of our health seminar with Dr. Nadine Plummer. We are so glad to have you here. It's such a wonderful thing to be able to see your faces in person. And I'm sure we also have our viewers joining in through YouTube. We're so glad that you have tuned in to join in our third day of our seminar series. I want to welcome you deeply from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much for coming. We welcome you to our health seminar series. Before we have prayer and I share a couple announcements, I want to take 1 minute to kind of, if I could say, promote or advertise this program, because I've been here yesterday's program and on the first day's program. Yes, we have been blessed, right? For those who were here, for those who tuned in for the past 2 days, we have been blessed by the important key principles that were presented by Dr. Plummer, particularly about how we have to consider health as a holistic concept, how we have to evaluate and tackle the core question of why we eat what we eat. And also, particularly yesterday, what actually was really important for me was that power of belief, right? You mentioned about the power of belief that, when we actually, before we actually make the action to intentionally care for our health, we have to have it firm in our minds, in our brains. We have to have the belief that we can actually make a change. We can make an impact. So yes, it all starts with the right mindset, right? With the right mindset. And probably this was, for including myself, this was the missing piece for many of us, right? We often focus on too much on what we have to do, but we tend to forget about having the right mindset. So I think that is a great starting point, a key principle for us when it comes to maintaining and keeping our health. And I'm sure today and in the following days, we are going to be learning about more and more important principles and tips on how we can maintain and keep our health. So at this point, I want to invite our head elder, Elder Ernest Ramprasad, to please come forward and offer us an opening prayer.
Let us bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we come to you today with humble hearts, seeking your guidance and wisdom as we continue this seminar. Lord, we ask that you would bless each and every one of us who has gathered here today, and that you would be present with us in a special way. Father, we pray that this program would be a time of learning, growth, and fellowship for all of us. Help us to listen to one another with open hearts, with open minds, and to support each other as we strive to serve you in all that we do. Lord, bless Dr. Plummer, who has come here to Immanuel Church to teach us and inspire us. Please give her the strength and the courage to continue following your will and to use the gifts and talents you have given her to make a positive difference in our homes, in our church, in our community, and in the world. Bless her as she continues this program this evening. May your Spirit inspire her, that in turn that we will be inspired to make the changes necessary so we can be of service to you in better health and helping others as well. We give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much. Well, before we go on with the program, I want to mention a few important announcements for us to take note. So for those who are coming in to the sanctuary, we want to encourage you to register at our registration booth, that is right at the front of the church. Please provide your name and your contact information, as we want to keep a data of how many participants we are having each day. So please don't forget to register at the registration booth. If you have not done so, please take the time to register at the front. Also, for those who are joining us through online, if it's all right with you, feel free to leave your name, your contact information, so we have an idea of how many people who have joined our program. We also have, after the seminar, we have a special hands-on, checking activity program where we will be able to check our blood pressure at just in front of the church at the foyer. So after the program, don't just head home right away. We will encourage you to stay back and have the chance to assess what our health looks like currently. We also have a short Q&A session at the end of Dr. Plummer's presentation, probably about 10 to 15 minutes. We have a microphone set up for you at the front, so feel free to come up front and ask your questions. Please be concise with your questions, and we will be able to hear the answers to your questions. Also, for those who are joining online, if you have any questions, feel free to leave your questions in the chat, and we will try our best to address your questions. Before I hand over the time to Dr. Plummer, I want to once again take 1 or 2 minutes to briefly introduce her to our audience for those who may have missed it the previous nights. Dr. Nadine Plummer is a naturopathic doctor who is licensed in both British Columbia and in Ontario. She is particularly interested in chronic lifestyle as well as obesity. She is a new author, and she gives frequent presentations about weight loss and lifestyle medicine. She is a graduate of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto. As well, she is a member of the Ontario Association of Naturopathic Doctors, as well as the Canadian Association of Naturopathic Doctors. She holds a BA, as well as an MA, and a doctorate of naturopathy. Dr. Plummer's mission and her vision through her ministry is to share the information, the principles that she has studied, that she has researched on for a long time with her audience, so that those who hear her would be able to receive those principles to make a change in our lives and to be able to save our lives and to make a drastic change in our lifestyle habits. At this time, I want to hand over the time to Dr. Plummer, and may we give our undivided attention to her as she makes her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And thank you very much for the prayer. Amen. So I'm just praying that God will speak for me and the message will go out. Today, Pastor G mentioned that we have high blood pressure, kind of like a mini clinic set up at the back. And today's presentation is actually on high blood pressure, eating and high blood pressure. What is it? Can we reverse it? But before I get into the presentation, I just want to talk a bit about what the rest of the week is going to look like. So today is Tuesday. We're doing hypertension and eating. Tomorrow, which is today's Monday, so I'm skipping ahead. Tomorrow, which is Tuesday, we'll be talking about eating, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. So we're doing general topics, but today and tomorrow we're going to be talking about particular conditions. So eating, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. And also prevention. So if you don't have diabetes or Alzheimer's, please come out to listen or listen online about prevention for those diseases. On Wednesday, we'll talk about eating, of course, because we're always talking about food. Wednesday, we're talking about how to change our habits. In particular, how to change our eating habits, but that tends to be the challenge, right? We hear about what we need to do. I think most people know, or they have access to the internet, where they can find a few good tips on how to change things or what they should do. Often we know what we should do, but for some reason we don't apply it and we don't do it. So I wanted midweek to talk about how we can make these changes, how we can change our eating habits, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of water. On Thursday, we're talking about stress, exercise, and mental health. Stress, exercise, and mental health, that's Thursday evening at 7 p.m. And then on Friday at 7 p.m., we'll talk about sleep and immunity. There's so much more to learn about sleep than we know. And finally, at the very last day of our health week, Please come out on the morning, Sabbath morning, for an incredibly powerful sermon. I can't give you the title yet, but it will be powerful. And then we will wrap everything up, I think, at 4 p.m. And on that day, we'll be talking about emotional eating, the microbiome, overall health, anything we haven't talked about yet, and this idea of longevity. How can we live longer, but live longer and stronger, as opposed to living longer, but noticing kind of a decline in our health? So how can we live long and strong? So that's how we'll be ending everything off, overall health and longevity. But today we're talking about eating and hypertension. I want to give you an overall view of what the week is going to look like. And I can repeat that at the very end. But those are the topics that we'll try to cover during this week. Today we're talking about eating and hypertension, the final frontier. We've touched a little bit, as Pastor G was saying, on how to make changes, the belief that your changes can have an impact. We talked about stress reduction and exercise. I have to tell you before we start that I have written a book that encompasses these ideas. There was a time where I myself was not very healthy. I was about 50 to 60 pounds overweight, and I was searching for the answer. And then while I was living in Asia, I got quite sick, so I was searching for the answers without pharmaceuticals, and that was over 20 years ago. I spent a lot of time in the Far East looking for these kind of gems and secrets of health. And I guess over 20 years later now, I've probably completely aged myself. You can guess I'm not in my 20s. I put all of that information in a book. But I also want to find out if the studies show that the ways that I saw people eating and the things I observed, if studies show that it actually does lead to better health. So half of it is a story of someone who's traveling looking for the secrets to health, and half of it is the studies proving the things I discovered to actually be true. And we'll actually have that today as we go for the blood pressure clinic on the table in the front foyer. So hypertension. I also want to say, just before I get into high blood pressure, I am practicing what I preach, and I hope that you're implementing what you hear. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to do this week, because I myself do go through these phases where you're doing everything, then you have a lull, and then you're doing everything. And I was so inspired. I had the best workout like ever today as I was thinking about this. We've talked about exercise. I went to the gym. I was running, walking, doing an intermittent running, walking as I visualized what I'm going to talk about. I'm so encouraged. So I hope you're encouraged as well. Hypertension, why are we talking about it? Because it's possible to reverse hypertension. I'm not guaranteeing it. It's possible to control hypertension. It's possible to prevent hypertension so you actually never have it, especially if you're in the pre-hypertension range, which we'll talk about what that means. And if it's something that's in your family, that means you may be at risk, so you want to prevent it. What is it? Hypertension, meaning high blood pressure, is a long-term condition in which pressure in the arteries is consistently elevated. It might vary a little bit, but it's consistently elevated, meaning above what is considered to be a healthy range. And we'll talk about what those numbers are. It's known as the silent killer. I know, such a harsh name, the silent killer. Why? Because most people, if they've never measured their blood pressure, this is also one of the reasons why we're doing it here, most people will live with hypertension completely symptom-free. They may have one or two small symptoms that they they don't assess it and think it's hypertension. They'll say, oh, it's probably something else. And we'll talk about what those simple things are. But by the time you are actually experiencing the consequences of high blood pressure, it's already usually been uncontrolled for a while. This is why it's called the silent killer. Some might experience a few of these small things that you attribute to something else. One of them is headaches. So often when people have high blood pressure, they will get a headache. but they might think, oh, I have the headache because it's a tension headache, or I have the headache because of something I ate or drank, or I'm dehydrated. I would encourage you first drink some water and see if your headache's not going away. You might consider, especially if you've been getting these headaches consistently, you might think maybe my blood pressure is high. So that's one of the symptoms that people kind of write off for being something else. It's known as a killer because by the time those symptoms are expressed, it is advanced. Causes that are often overlooked. High blood pressure is sometimes a side effect of certain medications. It's sometimes because of stress, very often, because of diet, because of obesity. What happens if you have high blood pressure chronically over time? This is called uncontrolled blood pressure, meaning it is not controlled by medication, but I'd also say it's not controlled by lifestyle changes, etc. It can lead to kidney disease, to blindness, to stroke, or to a heart attack. We're going to get to the good news. We're starting with the reality, because you have to assess before you get to the good news, reversing, etc. Causes and risks of high blood pressure. Sometimes we're working and we feel like just biting our computers and throwing them out the window. I have had this experience. Stress. Stress is a cause or risk factor for high blood pressure. Other things, side effects of medications, and we're not aware. Signs of high blood pressure, as I said, headaches, and we think it's something else. So if you've been getting headaches, please, if you're here or if you're coming this week, please stay and have your blood pressure measured in our foyer after the presentation. This, as I said, often overlooked. So many people, if they are monitoring their blood pressure, they're taking their blood pressure, they're focusing on the numbers, but a lot of us don't actually, or a lot of people don't actually know what the numbers are. They just know, and it's important to know what is healthy and not healthy, but really what do these numbers mean? The top number is a measurement of your systolic blood pressure. The bottom number is a measurement of your diastolic blood pressure. And what does systolic and diastolic mean? Systolic means the pressure against the aortic arterial wall when your heart beats. So the aorta is the biggest vessel, the biggest blood vessel in the body. This is the pressure against the wall of the aorta when your heart squeezes the blood out. What is diastolic, the lower number? Pressure of the blood against the wall of the arteries and pressure in the arteries when your heart is relaxing and filling up just before it beats. So our heartbeat is actually the heart squeezing and contracting and resting, squeezing and resting, squeezing and resting. So the diastolic is more a matter of measuring the resting period, and the systolic is when your left ventricle is contracting, squeezing period. It's interesting because different things might affect each one of these. So stress tends to affect systolic more, not 100% guaranteed, but systolic more. And then issues with the heart and vessels themselves, especially the heart and the left ventricle when it gets enlarged, that can affect diastolic more in general. Okay, how to get an accurate reading, very important. I had a patient who was a virtual patient, and so I asked them to get, one of their issues was high blood pressure as well as high cholesterol, as well as pre-diabetes on their way to type 2 diabetes. Pre-something just means usually if you keep doing what you're doing within a matter of time, pre-diabetes, pre-hypertension, you're on your way to hypertension or diabetes. But they got the blood pressure monitor. When they came to see me, their blood pressure was high. When I asked them to do it at home and we'd have a virtual appointment, their blood pressure was very low, like even below normal. I said, what is happening here? Is it me? There is such a thing as white coat syndrome. So sometimes in person, when you see the doctor, your blood pressure is elevated because you're nervous. And then you go home, you're relaxed, and it's lower. But in this case, it was very low, like there was such a huge discrepancy. And so we measured it. I said, please measure it 5 days in a row, then we'll meet again. Low, 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 and then we met again, high. I said, I think this is beyond white coat syndrome. Describe to me what you're doing, because I hadn't actually instructed this person on how to take blood pressure, and that's what I do now. Because there's so many things that can affect the reading, and we don't realize it. So either we get a reading that's too high, it's inaccurate, or too low, it's inaccurate. An accurate reading is very important. Then we really know where we are. So I said, you know what, I wake up in the morning, I have my blood pressure cuff right there at the bedside table. You said I have to be in a relaxed environment, so I'm lying down in my bed, I'm feeling very relaxed, and I just reach over, I put the cuff on, and I press the button, and I'm very relaxed the whole time. And then after I feel the squeezing has released, I look at the numbers, and Dr. Plummer, that's what I'm telling you every day. I said, okay, this makes more sense, because when you're lying down, especially after you've been sleeping all night and he's barely even fully awake, when you're lying down, your blood pressure is lower. So you want to take your blood pressure after you wake up. You've been moving around a little bit, not too much, but moving around a little bit so you have a little more blood flow, maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes after you wake up, then you take your blood pressure. So I said, okay, for the next 5 days, take that blood pressure cuff, put it in maybe your dining room, so you have to walk to it, wait about 45 minutes, then we'll check. And it was elevated. And 5 days in a row it was elevated, so I said, okay, this is a more accurate reading. The other thing about getting an accurate reading, because blood pressure is affected so much by our emotional state, it's important to get 3 separate readings on 3 different occasions, and preferably around the same time. So if it's at 11 o'clock in the morning, then you do it day 2, 11 o'clock, day 3, 11 o'clock. If it's consistently within a very small range, like it looks the same every day, then that's an accurate reading. If you only take it once and it's elevated, that's kind of a cue. Okay, now I need to take it on 3 separate times to see. Perhaps you had an argument that day, or you were rushing, or you have work that you have to do, and so it was high because of stress. So 3 separate readings. Other things you don't want to take, hopefully there aren't that many coffee drinkers, but there might be. I'm an X coffee drinker. I'll say XXX because it's been that long, so I get to add extra X's now. But you don't want to drink coffee or caffeine, then take your blood pressure, because it tends to elevate blood pressure. So wait 1 hour and then take your blood pressure. Legs and ankles uncrossed. When I have patients and I say, I want you to relax, often they cross their legs because that's relaxed to them. That will make your blood pressure go up, especially your systolic, so the top number could be high. So you want your legs and ankles to be uncrossed. Arm at heart level. If your arm, I bet you didn't know there's so many things involved with taking blood pressure. Most people just put on that cuff. Arm at heart level. If your arm is down like this, then all the blood flow is going down towards your hands. Do you ever notice if you do this for a while, you get very creepy looking hands, like all of your veins get engorged, so enlarged. So you want your arm to be at heart level. If your arm's down like this, it's going to be low, so it would be an inaccurate reading. On bare skin, preferably, if you'd like it to be as accurate as possible, don't take it over your clothes. No talking. People love to put the blood pressure cuff on and then chat about how their day has been and what they ate, or maybe the person taking it talks with you, so how's your day been? This affects blood pressure, so you're taking blood pressure when you're quiet and in silence. Preferably after you've been resting for about 5 minutes. If you're rushing, and then take my blood pressure, it might be high. And you want to use a cuff size that's appropriate for you. So if you have a children's cuff size and you have an adult size arm, it's going to be inaccurate. In a relaxed seated position, it's affected by alcohol. Even if you were drinking alcohol the night before, your blood pressure could be high. It's also affected by sleep. So if you had a very disrupted sleep, or you pulled an all-nighter for some reason, it might be high the next day. Do not retake it immediately on the same arm. Lots of people will take their blood pressure and look at the number. You know what, I didn't like that. Dink, press the button, take it again. Getting a bit better. Dink, keep going until they get a number that they like. But every time you do that, you're actually constricting the arteries in the arm, So your blood pressure would appear to be lower. So I always take blood pressure first on the left arm because it's closest to the heart. And if I need to take it again, I'll either ask that person to put their arm in the air, we wait for a few minutes, and then we're pumping to get the blood flow back in the arm, and then we'll take it again, or you can take it on the right. Usually there's a small discrepancy between the two, but don't keep taking it until you kind of get a number that you like. Okay, what are the numbers? Keep in mind, there is such a thing, as I said, as a white coat reading, but overall, normal blood pressure is under 120 for the top number, under 80 for the bottom number. And so it's somewhere between 110 and 120 to 70 over 80. Pre-hypertension, and sometimes these numbers are changing, so this is from a few years ago, from 120 to 139. But generally, if I have a patient who's at 124, I'm not that worried. 80 to 89. Stage 1 hypertension, 140 to 159, and then the bottom number 90 to 99. Often a medical doctor might put you on high blood pressure medication if it's somewhere between 140 and 159, depending on your family history and your clinical history. Over 160, bottom line, bottom number over 100 is stage 2 hypertension. A hypertensive urgency, meaning this is like a big, there's something majorly wrong. If your systolic top number is 210, bottom number 120, you need to go make an appointment with your doctor or your medical professional and get that checked out. If your blood pressure is consistently that high, I've even had patients where it's 200, the top number, and I say, okay, you need to go to the hospital. Because when it gets too high, you're at risk for a stroke. So you don't want consistent high blood pressure at those very high numbers. Over 200, twice so far, I've said, you know what? You need to go to the hospital or make a doctor's appointment basically for tomorrow. So what is happening in the arteries? The smooth muscle, did you know that our arteries, which are like, you could think of them as a long garden hose, maybe smaller or bigger, they have 3 different linings, and one of those linings is muscular. So that lining is the lining that causes your arteries to constrict when you're frightened or you get very stressed, and relax when you're relaxed. So smooth muscles in the artery have a receptor. It binds to adrenaline. Adrenaline is released when you're stressed or very, very excited, and it's released due to the HPA axis response when we're stressed. HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal, which we talked about, I think, on day 1. This is why stress affects blood pressure. Your body responds by constricting the blood vessels, and then there's a lot of pressure trying to get the blood through. You can imagine a garden hose. If the water's going through the garden hose and somebody folds the garden hose or squeezes it really hard, then there's more pressure, and sometimes like the actual knob that's coming out of it the water starts spurting out from there, which we don't ever want in our bodies. When we're stressed, there's a high amount of circulating adrenaline in the body. These receptors contribute to vasoconstriction. Vaso meaning blood vessels, constriction meaning getting tight. And then you'll have a high reading at that point. What causes high blood pressure? We won't get too much into what the mechanisms of each one of these, but there are a few causes. One of them is atherosclerosis, meaning you've got a buildup of plaque. This is like a buildup of plaque contains some cholesterol in it, and it's clogging up your arteries. It's also known in layman's terms as hardening of the arteries or narrowing of the arteries. This definitely is one of the major causes of high blood pressure. Another one is the RAAS system, which is called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So basically there's an imbalance in sodium, water retention, etc., and it kicks off this system that causes you to retain a lot of water. Factors that are affecting blood pressure: cardiac output, blood volume, and resistance. I want us to focus more on resistance resistance. It's like the water going through the garden hose, and there's a resistance there because either the garden hose, which is your arteries, are constricted, you're stressed, or they're narrow because your arteries are kind of clogged up with fat and cholesterol and plaque. So cardiac output makes a difference, blood volume, the artery diameter, and blood viscosity. Viscosity is like the stickiness or thickness of your blood. That's why there are some things that people take that thin the blood and their blood pressure improves. Just quickly, if you could imagine that this is your heart, just imagine for a moment, and that one vessel there is nice and wide, and the blue, if you think of it as blood, is flowing through no problem because the artery is nice and open. And if you look at the other one, that artery is narrow because that yellow film in the inside the artery is plaque. So there's not as much space for the blood to flow through. So the heart's pumping and the blood's trying to get through, but it's more narrow. This is high blood pressure. And as we know, the heart continues to pump 24/7 and the blood's flowing through 24/7. This is why high blood pressure is chronic. If you look at this, this is a picture of atherosclerosis or plaque. The yellow stuff there is plaque. And this is the inside of an artery, well, an imagined kind of animation of the inside of the artery. The blood flow is not going to be nice and smooth when the plaque is there, preventing nice, smooth flow. Another picture of it. So in those areas where there's a lot of plaque, it's hard to get the blood through. And that's basically one of the major causes of high blood pressure. What puts you at risk for having that atherosclerosis or high blood pressure? Number one, obesity. Number two, diet, which we'll talk about. Low physical exercise. It seems like, and we're going to talk about exercise, as I said, on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. So please don't miss that, because exercise tends to be a common denominator answer for nearly everything that we're talking about. There's always kind of the exercise pill or medication, if you want to think of exercise as medication. So not enough physical exercise is a contributing factor. I was actually listening to a world-leading expert on exercise today as I exercised. So I was listening to my podcast and running and listening to what he was saying. And he was saying that exercise is preventative, a little bit less when we're in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. It still helps to prevent diseases. But as you get in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, exercise has a much bigger role in preventing lifestyle diseases or chronic diseases. And he gave a few percentages. He said your percentage of benefit from exercise when you're younger is about 20%. But your percentage of benefit from exercise when you're getting older is about 50%. So exercise is often the thing that's missing in helping prevent diseases or reverse diseases when we're moving into our 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. Low physical exercise is a risk factor. Certain chronic conditions, low vitamin D, and of course, if you have pre-hypertension, you notice those numbers are going up, it's like a red flag that you're on your way. Other things, smoking, alcohol, side effects of some medications, and other risk factors. If you have a family history, your mother or father had high blood pressure or have high blood pressure, grandparents, etc., you're at higher risk. Gender, age, as we age, our risk of high blood pressure goes up, but it's not guaranteed. The interesting thing is a lot of people are expecting these conditions as they get older. However, it's more environment and some of these risk factors, environment, lack of exercise. As we get older, we tend to exercise less. Am I right? Hopefully everybody here is saying, no, I'm still exercising just as much as when I was 20 or 10 years old. But we tend to exercise less. We tend to eat differently. So age is a factor. And race, they found that people that are of African descent of some kind are at a higher risk of high blood pressure. So those are all factors that many of them are changeable. There are two types of factors, factors that we can change and factors that we can't change. We can't change our age, but we can change our chronological age. Whoops, I said that wrong. We can't change our chronological age, but we can change our physiological and biological age. Have you ever met someone who's like 45, but they seem like they're about 65 or 70 years old? I have. Have you ever met someone who's about 70, but you would guess they're about 45? Yes? So we can change our biological and physiological age based on lifestyle changes. So I want to encourage everyone to embrace lifestyle changes. And if you're young, then I'd encourage you to keep it up, keep going. These are some of the factors that lead to hypertension, as I said. Diet, meaning eating foods like that, fast foods, a lot of foods that are high in sugar, a lot of foods that are processed foods. Alcohol, being sedentary, smoking, stress, a very big one, and certain medications. The answer there is on the bottom. I'm not saying go and eat birthday cake all the time. There's a reason why that's there. So making sure you go out and get some sunshine in the wintertime, perhaps taking vitamin D supplements. The birthday cake is there as an idea of celebration. Celebrating big events in your life, celebrating birthdays with friends and loved ones, having joy in your life brings down blood pressure. The tree is a tree of community, just like everyone who's listening online and people who are here. Having a community, not feeling alone, feeling like you're connected to people can bring down blood pressure. The question mark is being curious. Asking, what can I do? How can I educate myself? What are the factors I can implement? And finally, what's cut off there is a blood pressure monitor. Checking your blood pressure so you know if it's going up so you can kind of catch it if it's in the pre-hypertension stage. Hopefully that makes sense. I won't go into this too much because this all sounds like bad news. But we're going to get to the good news. But first we have to take a look. I was listening to a seminar on personal development and business, and the person who was giving the seminar said, I don't tell people to look out in their garden and say to themselves, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, and identified there are weeds in my garden. This is like our health. We have issues in our health. So don't try to tell yourself with good affirmations. Look at the weeds and then ask yourself, how can I take the weeds out? So this is like looking at the weeds. What are the effects of high blood pressure? Then we're going to talk about how can we reverse it or make it better or prevent it. So some of these complications you may have heard of. One of them is the lining of the artery. So there are 3 linings on the artery. It's like a tube. But when there's a lot of tension and a lot of pressure over time, just like a garden hose where you keep cranking it up and your garden hose over time gets a little bit weak, one of the layers might bubble a little bit. It won't break. If it breaks, we're in bad trouble. And this bubbling is called, or a pocket is called an aneurysm. And an enlarged artery or aneurysm in certain areas, especially on the aorta, that's what can happen as a complication of high blood pressure. Kidney failure, a blocked artery or blood clot, enlarged heart, just like exercising at the gym. This is what at least most guys, I think, are at the gyms I go to. This is what they want. When you're working a muscle, again and again and again, it tends to get bigger and stiff. Well, our heart is like a muscle, and it has to push really hard if your blood vessels are constricted or if they're filled with plaque. So the heart's pumping harder and harder and harder. Over time, the heart gets bigger. Just especially the left ventricle. This is called left ventricular hypertrophy, basically meaning your left ventricle gets bigger. Now, in exercise, or if you're like, professional bodybuilder, that's good. But for us inside, we don't want an enlarged heart because that heart gets stiff and the heart has to be able to contract and then relax. And if your heart's stiff, it's not going to relax as much. And the space around the heart, the little pocket in the heart, which is called a ventricle, it's in an open hollow space, it gets filled with muscle. This is what causes your lower number, diastolic, to be high. Your heart gets stiff and the muscle takes up a lot of space. There's only one way. Once the heart gets like that, you can't actually shrink the heart. You'd actually have to have an operation where they cut some of the muscle out of your heart. So we want to avoid that. Clot in the neck, which then can travel to the brain, that's a stroke. People also have memory loss. They don't often think of high blood pressure and memory, but these two actually go together. It's called an ischemic issue, meaning because there's plaque in the arteries and all of the blood vessels going up to the head are smaller, you're not getting as much blood flow to the brain, and then you experience what's similar to dementia. Does that make sense? Often people don't put those two things together. So, aging, systolic hypertension. I'm actually going to skip this because I think we've talked a lot about all of the bad effects. Secondary causes, if you have growth hormone excess, which isn't common, if someone has hyperthyroidism, not hypo, an issue with the thyroid, everything with hyper, everything speeds up, and they tend to get high blood pressure as well as a really high heart rate, and oral contraceptives containing estrogen. Moving on. What to do? How do I do it? As Pastor G was saying, first you have to believe you can have an impact. And part of that is the step to making a change. Admit you have an issue, and admit you need to change it. So you'll be ready, hopefully you're ready to address it, and don't brush it off. Don't brush it off, because high blood pressure can lead to very serious outcomes. Why make lifestyle changes? To avoid the risk of cardiac or cerebral vascular disease, basically to avoid death. Yes, we're all going to die sometime, but why not try to, there could be accidents, etc., but why not try to avoid it as much as possible and make lifestyle changes now? Avoid the terrible trio. When I was studying clinical medicine at school, we called these three things, actually my professor did, the terrible trio. Why? Because if someone has one thing, it tends to put them at risk for the other, and we tend to see these three things together. Those are high blood pressure, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Heart failure, cholesterol issues, those three tend to go together. So you want to avoid that. I said that one of the things that causes high blood pressure is high stress. So we're going to do a test. Now the test is if these two images look similar to you, it means you have too much stress in your life. Are you ready? Here we go. I think. Okay. They look totally different to me. If they look similar to you, the stress is affecting your eyes. That's what I think. Let's try another one. No? So stress is a big, big factor. So we want to cut stress down. And we'll talk about that on Thursday, how to cut down stress. Okay, let's talk about some of the answers. Now that we know what high blood pressure is, we know what the complications and consequences are, let's talk about what can we do. First, I would say changing your diet and managing your lifestyle. This includes losing weight if you're overweight. Don't expect changes right away. You'd have to be consistent in diet and lifestyle for 2 to 3 months, unless you have advanced high blood pressure or other risks. This is from the CTC. I also got my certificate or certification in pharmaceuticals for my British Columbia license, so we had to study from the CTC, the Canadian Therapeutic Compendium of all of the different pharmaceutical drugs. And this is actually from that book, which is amazing because it mostly talks about medication. But under hypertension, it discusses the Mediterranean diet, the portfolio diet, the DASH diet, which we're going to talk about, increasing olive oil, choosing fish consumption, making sure that your fiber intake is around 30 grams per day. If you're increasing your fiber, Remember, you also want to increase your water, or you'll have issues with constipation. Limiting alcohol, and I would say there are studies now that show that even less than 1 drink a day is being recommended. I believe reducing sodium intake and increasing your FNV. FNV, as well as exercise, tend to be the answers to many things. FNV, that's the phrase I use, fruits and vegetables. So exercise and increasing your fruits and vegetables. There was a diet that was created by the National Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute. So within the National Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute, they wanted to see, is there a way of controlling or stopping or reversing high blood pressure without medication? Is there a diet that you can follow that has that effect? And this is amazing. This is the National Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute. You would think that they're looking more like just pharmaceuticals. But they created a diet called the Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension, also known as the DASH diet. Has anyone here heard of the DASH diet? Awesome. We're going to talk a little bit about the DASH diet tonight. Also, maintaining a healthy BMI, meaning a BMI between 18 to 25. BMI stands for Body Mass Index. This is basically how much you weigh in relation to how tall you are. When I was very overweight, I remember thinking, oh, if I can just grow 6 inches, everything will be fine, because then my BMI would be lower. Anyway, BMI 18 to 25 is considered healthy. 26 to 27, generally around 26 if you're older, meaning over 60 or 65. Systolic blood pressure will decrease by about 2, and then your diastolic will decrease by about 1 per 1 kilogram of weight loss, meaning if your BMI is considered to be overweight or you're overweight, just losing a little bit of weight can start to make those numbers come down, which is good news. This is the diet that was created by the Canadian Heart, Blood, and Lung Institute, the DASH diet. Basically, what are the 2 major risk factors for heart disease and stroke? They are high blood pressure and high LDL cholesterol, meaning the cholesterol that's called the bad cholesterol. I'm saying this because the dietary approach to stop hypertension addresses these 2 things: high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Studies have shown that this diet can lower blood pressure in as little as 2 weeks. This isn't me saying it. In as little as 2 weeks. The diet can also lower the LDL, or bad cholesterol levels in the blood. So I'm just going to say some basic components of what to do as part of the diet and what not to do. We'll start with what not to do. You should limit foods made of refined grains, such as white bread, pastries, limit sweets, and I would say also limit processed foods. Okay, what to do? And there's a lot here, so, oops, oh, hold on. Nope. Okay, what to do? You want to increase your non-starchy vegetables and fruits. As I said, F and V, fruits and vegetables. And if you're thinking of which fruits, you'd always go towards the darker fruits first. The berries, the blueberries, blackberries, even the raspberries, they have a similar component, a similar chemical in it called anthocyanins. Hoscop berries, elderberries, there's another really popular berry that's blue. But go for the dark berries. Eat moderate portions of, and this is not what I'm saying, this is in the DASH diet, fat-free or low-fat dairy products. I actually recommend to most of my patients that they don't eat dairy. Whole grains, lean meats, poultry, beans, soy foods, egg substitutes, eggs. Fish is part of the DASH diet. Nuts, seeds, heart-healthy fats like olive oil, canola oil. I'd also say avocado oil, and to include avocados. What are the portions? Grains and grain products, 7 to 8 daily servings. Vegetables, 4 to 5. Fruits, 4 to 5. Low-fat or fat-free dairy, 2 to 3. Meat, poultry, and fish, less than 2. And I would recommend maybe 0. Nuts, seeds, Dry beans 4 to 5 times per week. Fats and oils 2 to 3 times per week. Sweets 5 times per week, which is very surprising. But even sweets like dried fruits are sweets, so this isn't necessarily processed sweets. Olive oil, they've done studies on olive oil and found that in following the DASH diet and including olive oil, it's also a component in the Mediterranean diet, it can reduce the needs for medication for high blood pressure. Most people have probably heard to bring down your blood pressure, you need to do 2 main things. Number 1, reduce stress. Number 2, reduce salt. Has anyone heard that? Reduce salt for good blood pressure. Yes? The interesting thing is the question is, where is the salt? So when most people are reducing salt, they don't put as much salt on their food. But that's not where the salt is. The salt is mostly in the processed foods. So the salt is already inside the food. So even if you're putting less salt on the food, or you're cooking with less salt, the salt's already in there. So the answer there would be, as I'm sounding a little bit like a broken record here, because there are a few key things for health, the answer there would be to eliminate as much as possible processed foods. You could even go with the 80%, 20% rule, which is 20% of your diet would be processed, 80% of your diet would be all natural. So remember, the salt is in the food already. Things that can help, as I said, exercise. A minimum of 30 minutes per day for 4 days or more per week can help to reduce blood pressure. By 4 to 9, the numbers will go down. Great options for exercise: walking, swimming. Swimming is amazing because water has such a nice calming effect on our nervous system. Unless you can't swim or you're just learning, then you might be stressed in the water. But overall, water is very, very relaxing. The Canadian Heart and Stroke Foundation, as I said, recommends 150 minutes of exercise per week. What kind of exercise are we talking about? Brisk walking. So you're not just going for a stroll, you're brisk walking. They've also found that dog owners tend to be a little more slender and have better outcomes than people who don't have dogs, because usually, unless they're one of those dog owners who just opens the back door and says, you know, come back in a while, but usually they're taking their dogs for a walk. So not that I'm recommending you get a dog to help with reducing your blood pressure, but it might help. Other things, this is overall, this from CHEP, this is from Hypertension Canada, health behaviors in adults with hypertension. This is a quick summary. So reduce foods with added sodium. That means really you're reducing foods that have the salt already in it, processed foods. You could also reduce a little bit of salt in the cooking. Whenever I've said this, people normally look at me like, what? Because people find just adding a little bit of salt tends to bring out the flavor in the food, right? So you can be minimal with the amount of salt that you add. And of course, easy to reduce the salt you're putting on the food. But remember, it's the salt is already in the food. Weight loss, you want a BMI of under 25. Alcohol restriction, I would say 0 drinks per day. Physical activity, 30 minutes to 60 minutes, 4 to 7 days per week. The DASH diet that we've talked about, reducing or completely eliminating smoking, and waist circumference. This is really interesting. You can go home today after this presentation, get out a tape measure, or you can buy one if you don't have one, and measure around the waist. The most important thing is that you're consistent in finding where your waist is. So if one day you're measuring 2 fingers above the belly button, and the next day you're measuring below the belly button, it looks like you've suddenly, depending on the order, gained or lost centimeters. So I tend to measure just 2 fingers, just slightly above the belly button, and that's the waist circumference. If your waist circumference, the recommendation for hypertension is a waist circumference for men under 102 centimeters, for women under 88 centimeters. When we start gaining weight in the midriff area, so abdominal obesity, that puts us at risk for bad outcomes, including cardiovascular disease or heart attacks. What else can help? Just a few minutes left. What can help? This is not what I'm recommending because you're not actually officially my patient, so I'm not, legally I can't make recommendations unless it's one-on-one with my patients and we do health history, et cetera, to do my due diligence. But this is based on studies. So they did a study with garlic, and they did 10 trials, and in 3 they had systolic blood pressure, meaning the top number was high. They found that garlic reduced that top number by 16.3. That's a big reduction. And what does garlic do? Garlic thins the blood. And it's also antibacterial, antiviral, anti-fungal, and also antisocial. But, so blood thinner, so garlic acts as a blood thinner, but if you're taking blood thinners already, like a blood thinner medication, then you have to be very careful, because then you're taking garlic and your blood could get too thin, and then, the extreme thing would be risk of hemorrhage. The other thing is you cut yourself or injure yourself and your blood's not clotting. The diastolic blood pressure went down by 3 compared to people who were taking a placebo. So both these were patients who had the elevated top number. Attention, as I said here, with blood thinners. What else can help? A particular type of fish called the bonito fish. The peptides in this fish have the same kind of effects as a popular blood pressure medication called an ACE inhibitor. And they've done studies using this fish, comparing it to the ACE inhibitor, and they found that it's very similar effects. Because of EPA and DHA, you could also take fish oil, but again, fish oil tends to thin the blood. So you want to be careful if you're on a blood thinner. What else? A beautiful, popular, beautiful, lovely plant flower called hibiscus. So hibiscus tea can actually bring down blood pressure, and they've done studies on hibiscus tea and blood pressure. They found in these studies, if they were drinking 2 cups, so that's around 10 grams of the dried flower that they're making into a tea, because this flower contains something called anthocyanins, which are also in red, black, and blue fruits. That's one of the factors that helps hibiscus that causes it to reduce blood pressure. So in the studies, it was an infusion prepared with 10 grams, totaling about 9.6 milligrams of this chemical anthocyanins. They had it daily, empty stomach, before breakfast. And it was compared to an ACE inhibitor, which is a blood pressure medication called Cadopril. And they found that it decreased that top number from 139, meaning that person is in pre-hypertension, to 123 approximately. The bottom number from 90 all the way down to 79. Isn't that powerful? Hibiscus tea. You have to drink enough of it. Of course, this is based on the studies, so the results aren't guaranteed. Enough of it every morning before breakfast on an empty stomach. What else can help? They've done studies on magnesium. In these studies, they took a range between 250 milligrams up to 950 milligrams per day. There are many different types of magnesium. There's magnesium citrate, there's magnesium bisglycinate, and they tend to affect us in different ways. Magnesium citrate often causes loose stools, so be warned. And magnesium bisglycinate can help to loosen muscles and helps with headaches as well. Just as it helps nerve function throughout the body, magnesium is important for coordinating the activity of your heart muscles and your nerves that actually initiate the heartbeat. If your magnesium levels are low, and you can get them tested, then you're more likely to be at risk for an irregular heartbeat and also for heart palpitations, meaning that you can feel your heart beating. What else can help? A supplement called coenzyme Q10, which is strongly recommended if you're on a statin drug for high cholesterol. So coenzyme Q10. In these studies, they took 100 to 120 milligrams, and they didn't get that effect right away. This is like a 1 month to 3 month study, and it resulted in clinically significant greater reductions in the top number and the bottom number. Top number reduced by 11, bottom number by 7, and a decrease in the heart rate as well. So their heart was beating slower. Heart rate went down by about 12. We're getting to the end now. What else can help? One of my favorite juices, pomegranate juice. So delicious. Did you know pomegranates are actually high in protein? You don't often think of fruits and protein. Pomegranates are high in protein. The thing with pomegranate juice is it's a little bit tart, and also often you get it in a blend. So on the front it might say 100%. When you flip it over, it's pomegranate juice with maybe apple juice. Apple juice is commonly used in a blend. So just look at the ingredients to make sure it's pure. So in these studies, pomegranate juice consumption was compared to an ACE inhibitor, which is also a blood pressure medication. And they've found that pomegranate juice inhibits serum angiotensin converting enzyme, which is ACE. It's an activity, and it reduced that top number. And that is from a journal called Atherosclerosis from 2001. So it's a little bit older, but in that study, pomegranate juice was what was used as the, compared to ACE inhibitors in these control studies. They looked at drinking 16 ounces per day. That's like 2 cups of pure pomegranate juice. And they found a 5% decrease in the top number, but they were drinking that pomegranate juice for about 1 year. So for some of these things, it takes time. Let's do a quick summary. We talked about the DASH diet. I've also found that adding celery into the diet is very helpful. They've also found that the Mediterranean diet is helpful as well, and we will be talking about the Mediterranean diet tomorrow as part of our discussion on eating, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. Exercise, we talked about having a healthy BMI, meaning not being overweight, reducing salt, reducing alcohol, or cut it out completely. Why not? So many benefits. Using garlic, remember if you're taking a blood thinner, you have to be careful with garlic and even with fish oil. Pomegranate juice every day. Dark chocolate tends to have a good effect. But if you're not drinking or if you're not eating chocolate, why start? Hibiscus tea and other things that just help to bring down stress. Relaxation with prayer. Very effective for reducing stress and other types of stress reduction. There are many medications that are normally given once your blood pressure goes over 160, but in some cases, medical doctors recommend it even before it gets to 160. I just want to touch a little bit on one of the terrible trio that I mentioned. I said that high blood pressure is common with diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So we're going to be touching on diabetes tomorrow. So just a little taste of what's coming up tomorrow. Pre-diabetes. I said a key time to make lifestyle changes was if you're pre-high blood pressure, pre-diabetes. They found with people who have pre-diabetes, a loss of 5% of body weight can reduce it from going into diabetes by 60%. Fruit. If you're choosing fruits, and we had a question the other day about fruits, and I've recommended the dark fruits. If you're pre-diabetic or you're worried about diabetes, you want to choose fruits that are low on the glycemic index. The glycemic index is like the index of it shows how quickly things are converted into sugar in the bloodstream. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow when we talk about Alzheimer's, eating, and diabetes. I'll end with this idea. I want to give you a mission. Yes, a mission. Why? Because we're not just talking, we're also doing. So your mission is to get your blood pressure checked if you're here today, outside, and also to incorporate more exercise in your lifestyle, meaning your mission is maybe tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon to go out for a walk, brisk walking for 30 minutes. Does everyone think that's a mission they can do? Brisk walking for 30 minutes tomorrow. Let's see a raise of hands. All right, you have accepted the mission. We're going to end now with some questions. So today for the questions, we're actually asking you to come up to the front. There's a mic there that's ready. For questions, we'll just take a few, and then after that, we'll move, if you're interested, into the foyer to have your blood pressure checked. Also, my book that I mentioned at the beginning, which is called Authentic You, a step-by-step journey to the habits beyond dieting, the habits towards long-term health. The book will be on sale as well when we move into the foyer. But let's start with some questions now. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello.
Hi.
You mentioned that reducing salt helps
Yes.
with hypertension. What about changing the type of salt, like using sea salt or,
Yeah.
pink Himalayan salt?
Yeah. There are some benefits to Himalayan salt, but overall, your body is responding in a similar way, whether it's table salt, iodized salt, non-iodized salt, very small differences, but for blood pressure, not a major difference. But that's a good question. Any other questions? Don't be shy, even though you have to walk up to the front today. Yes?
You said if you haven't been eating chocolate, why start now?
Yeah.
But it was in the list.
Yes.
Perhaps you should have said, if you haven't been eating chocolate, start now.
The reason why I said why start now is because chocolate has just a little bit of caffeine in it, and normally I recommend that people eliminate caffeine, but they have found in studies that dark chocolate tends to be one of the things that you could opt for to help with blood pressure, but there's so many other options. The other thing is sometimes people start with the dark chocolate and it can be quite bitter, so not very many people like it. So they'll get the dark chocolate that is sweetened. So the dark chocolate you can get 90% pure, even 99% pure. Has anybody tasted that here? No? It is very, very bitter. So people normally opt for maybe 50%, etc., and then it's mixed with sugar. So that's why I think there are other options that you could choose instead of the dark chocolate. But if you are choosing dark chocolate, then you want it to be as pure as possible with as little to no sugar added. So this is like the 90%, 99% pure dark chocolate. Do you want a follow-up?
First of all, thank you, Dr. Nadine, for a very informative presentation.
Amen.
My question is, which is more dangerous, high blood pressure or low blood pressure? When I say low blood pressure, maybe the systolic reading is below 90 or 80, and the diastolic reading is below 60 or even 50. And before you answer that, I have another question too. Do you need a doctor's prescription for the magnesium as well as for the
Coenzyme
Q10? Do you need a prescription or you can just pick it up from the counter?
Right. Question number 2, I'll answer that one. Well, maybe I'll answer number 1 first. I didn't talk about the numbers for low blood pressure. So it's interesting because some people tend to have low blood pressure consistently all the time. So for some people, it's 100 over 60, or it might even be 90 over 60. If it's consistently 90 over 60 or 100 over 60, then I would say it's not dangerous. But if it is not, and then it starts going low, then you're at risk for having fainting spells or losing your balance, and then it's dangerous. So if low blood pressure is not your norm, and then it starts going low, like under 90, or even if 95 is not normal for you, 95 is not bad, and under 60, then it's dangerous and you're at risk for a falling risk. So we wouldn't want that. With high blood pressure, it's more a matter of consistent and ongoing high blood pressure, which is very dangerous, which puts you at risk for aneurysms, heart attack, stroke, etc. But the interesting thing is the numbers. If you notice 120 over 80, I said 100 over 60, I have low blood pressure, so that's a great question. My norm is about 100 over 60, sometimes 90 over 60. At times it has been 80 over 50. That's too low. But normally there is a pulse pressure, that's the difference between the numbers, of about 40. So you want it to be between 30 and 40, and that's the norm. So I would say over time, high blood pressure is more risky. If it suddenly drops really low, something's going on, and you're at risk for dizziness, falling. If you're driving, then you're at risk. So you'd want to get that checked out for sure. If you've consistently had low blood pressure, then usually it's not risky. Your second question, magnesium coenzyme Q10. They are available. You can get magnesium or coenzyme Q10 without a prescription nearly at any health food store. But I would advise that you actually go see perhaps a naturopathic doctor. And I'm not just saying that because I am a naturopathic doctor, but it's important that your healthcare professional tells you the right amount and how to take it, and that kind of depends on your health. So yes, you can just buy it, but I think it's better if you buy it with the recommendation of maybe an ND. Did that answer your questions?
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
You said that if you have high blood pressure, you get headache.
Yes, you can get a headache.
But is it a normal headache or a different type of headache? Like, I don't know. But
So there's so many different types of headaches. Usually it's not, and I'm going to be careful because it could possibly be something like a migraine, where migraines often affect, people will get a prodrome, meaning that they notice that their vision gets a little bit funny, then the migraine comes on, and then it might last 3 to 5 days. They have photophobia, and they're sensitive to light, sound, etc. It's not normally that type of headache.
okay.
It's more of just maybe similar to a stress headache. That's why I think usually, I'm prefacing this with usually, that's why people write it off. Or a dehydration headache, where it's just that like constant pain in might be the temple or the head area. And people might think, oh, it's just because I'm stressed, which is interesting because stress is a factor to both headaches and high blood pressure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think we'll have one more question because it's 8:15, and then we'll move to the blood pressure clinic outside, as we've talked about blood pressure. Go ahead. So this would be the last question. If you have other questions, I'll be in the foyer, and you can come and chat with me there. Go ahead.
I saw on YouTube
On YouTube. Uh-oh.
that the mitochondria is responsible for the energy.
Yes. It's the powerhouse of the cell.
That's right. And to increase, if you have low energy, you have fewer mitochondria. But you could increase the mitochondria to increase your energy by exercise. But it is also recommended that you exercise in such a way that you're out of breath. Is that true? Is that recommended?
Well, we'll talk about that on Thursday. But yes, the mitochondria is basically, just to explain, we have, in our cells, we have organelles. They're like little mini organs. And the mitochondria is the thing in our cell. I think it uses ATP. ATP is like an energy fuel that our body naturally produces. And we actually we get ATP from food as well. The food that we eat goes through the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain, and then goes into our cells, and our cells use ATP as an energy source. So the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell that's using that energy, if that makes sense. And exercise in a certain way. I've actually listened a lot maybe not so much on YouTube, but a little bit on podcasts, about increasing mitochondria. Because well, I wouldn't say an ex-runner, because I'm planning on running in a few months, but I've been running, and I want more power. And also I talk to people who are building muscle, and they want more power, etc. And I have heard that you have to work out in a way where there's enough friction or challenge, and that's what helps to build up mitochondria and have more power. But I can't say that I have any studies to prove that. But for the brisk walking, you're walking in a way where you are nearly out of breath, but not fully. You're walking in a way where you could still have a conversation, but it's challenging. But I can answer that question fully by doing some research on some studies, because I'd like to know as well, because I'm exercising, and I want to have more power and energy on Thursday night. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. I hope that everyone will be here Thursday night, because we'll talk about exercise. But thank you for bringing that up. We do get the power and energy in our bodies from our mitochondria. And actually, there have been studies on coenzyme Q10, and that can have a positive effect on mitochondria as well, which also has a positive effect on high blood pressure. But if you can get it without taking supplements, then it's better to do it naturally. I think what we'll do now is, what's next is we'll have a closing prayer. And then we'll move into the foyer, and I'd recommend that everybody gets their blood pressure taken, because I want to know. But more than that, hopefully you want to know now as well. So let's end with a prayer. Lord Jesus, we're just so thankful, God, that you have given us such fearfully and wonderfully made bodies. Lord, that you provide incredible foods for us. Lord, that you give us the option of eating to live or living to eat. And we're thankful for this time. I pray, God, that you'll be with everyone who has listened and everyone who is about to listen, Lord, and that you'll lead each one of us in the particular ways that you know we need to be led so that we can have greater health. We say these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, everybody, I'll see you in the foyer.